Welcome to another edition of Chit Chat with Jerry Mahoney. How's it going, Jerry? Good, good, good. How are you? I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. What are we doing today on Chit Chat? Well, today, classes have started back up at the college where I teach English, and I thought today we would talk about the fascinating subject of what? Punctuation. No way. Yeah, let's do it. The semicolon. Okay, let's talk about the semicolon. But before we do that, before we dive into the particulars, let me just say a few words about punctuation marks. Punctuation marks are much like little road signs to tell the reader where you're headed as a writer. For example, a stop sign is much like a period in a sentence. You know to stop. A comma is a little bit like a yield sign. You slow down and then you keep going. Same thing with exclamation marks. You know that there's an emphatic tone there. You're making an emphasis. Same thing with a question mark. You're asking a question. So when you see punctuation, it's not that we're just trying to hold you to the rules. We're trying to encourage writers to use punctuation marks in a way that convey tone. Make sense? Yeah, that's great. I never heard it explained that way. That's what I'm here for, Jerry, to help you be a better writer. Great. Keep going. All right. Now, the semicolon is probably the most misused piece of punctuation that I see in student papers. The semicolon often gets mixed up with a comma because it looks like a comma, but it also has a little dot in there, which makes it have enough power to be a period. So the semicolon is a really cool piece of punctuation, but it's not something that you want to use very often. No. You only want to use it sparingly because most of the time you're going to use just a comma or a period. Now, a semicolon has the power to stop a sentence and start a new one. So you could put two sentences together that are complete independent sentences by themselves, and you can combine them with a semicolon when you want to draw attention to how closely related they are. Could you give an example? Well, sure. Let's think of an example. Jerry, what are two sentences that you can think of that are closely related? Let's see. How about Jim enjoys ventriloquism? Okay, Jim enjoys ventriloquism. He's no Paul Winchell. All right, that's true. I'm no Paul Winchell, but I do enjoy ventriloquism. So let's put those two sentences together. Jim enjoys ventriloquism. He is no Paul Winchell. Now, a semicolon there suggests through tone that those two ideas are closely related. In fact, often the semicolon has the ability to emphasize the second sentence that you are saying. And in this case, that he's no Paul Winchell. Here's how I would read that sentence with a semicolon. Jim enjoys ventriloquism. He's no Paul Winchell. Now we could put a comma, but in that sentence, in those two sentences, and combine them. This is called a coordinator. The words but, and, for, nor, or, yet, and so. Those are coordinators that work with commas. So we could, for example, say, Jim enjoys ventriloquism, comma, but he is no Paul Winchell. All right, so making sense so far? Yeah, I think so. So here's how I would read that sentence. Jim enjoys ventriloquism, but he's no Paul Winchell. With the semicolon, it sounds like this. Jim enjoys ventriloquism. He's no Paul Winchell. You see that difference, that little subtle difference in tone is what the semicolon can do for us. But you don't want to use it very often. If you use it too often, it looks like you're showing off, frankly. You don't really need to use a semicolon that often. Now, what's the other use of the semicolon you were saying? Right. So the other use of the semicolon we want to chat about today is that you can use a semicolon to separate items in a series, in a list. But most of the time, just go ahead and use commas if it's a short, simple list. You don't need to use a semicolon. The only time really we're going to use a semicolon is if you have a complete sentence, meaning you have a subject, verb, a complete thought, followed by a colon, okay? And then you can have a list of items that tend to be usually longer than you would need if you were just using commas. Well, what's an example? Well, let's think. Can you think of an example of a complete sentence that might be followed by a list? Okay, how about Jim enjoys the following hobbies? All right, Jim enjoys the following hobbies, colon, right. Not a semicolon, and you don't ever want to use a semicolon to introduce a series. That's a mistake. Use a colon to introduce a series or a list, and then separate those items with a semicolon. We often do that because sometimes those items have commas within them. If an item has a comma within, it can get really confusing with all those commas. So that's why you use the semicolon. But again, only if you really need to. Well, that's going to do it with today's episode of Chit Chat. No jokes? No jokes. Well, I have a joke. I have a grammar joke. Okay, go ahead. So the past, the present, and the future walk into a bar. Was it tense? You stole my punchline. I know. Hey, thanks for watching us today on Chit Chat with Jerry and Mahoney, and we'll see you next time. See you then.